Let's talk about what to do at the end of a verse going into the next verse. The first method you could use is to keep everything perfectly in time, not missing a beat. So you'll have to clip the last note of the verse in order to make this work. Let me show you. This is the last phrase of the hymn. So it's almost exactly like what you might do between phrases of the hymn, but at the end of the verse instead. Now, I personally would not use this method because I think it rushes the congregation. It takes a little bit of time for your eye to go from the bottom of the page to the top, and if you're singing in parts, to find your new pitch. Plus, you want to give the congregation just a little bit of time to process all of the glorious text that they just sang before they go on to a new verse of glorious text. So in that case, here are some options. One option is to hold the last note as a fermata. So as long as you need to get yourself prepared for the next verse, change your registrations, whatever, and then release the chord, provide 2 beats in the correct tempo of silence. 1 beat is for the congregation to realize, okay, we're turning around, we're going to the next verse. The second beat of silence is for the congregation to breathe together. Let me demonstrate what that might look like. If you're going to consistently use this method, I think it is pretty simple, and it's nice for the organist because you have enough time to do what you need to do to get prepared for the next verse. But you will have to train your congregation to not plow ahead while you're still holding your chord. Once you do this method a couple of times, they will probably catch on and realize, okay, I better wait until he or she releases the chord, and then I'll have plenty of time to get myself into the next verse. The third way of doing this is to calculate, do a little math, and calculate based on the number of beats in the last measure, the pickups at the beginning of the tune, and whatever time signature the tune is in. You can calculate how long to hold the last chord and how long to pause before going into the next verse. This hymn, O Worship the King, is in 3/4, and it has a pickup. Therefore, the last measure is a half note. I like to stick with the idea that the congregation needs about 1 beat to realize that we're going into the next verse, and 1 beat to take a sufficient breath. So with that in mind, I would hold the last note of this hymn for 3 beats. 1, 2, 3, rest, rest, da, da. So you're essentially adding 1 extra measure to the end of the hymn. Let me demonstrate. Let's say this hymn did not have a pickup. That means the last measure would be 3 beats, and the tune would start on beat 1. Let's just pretend that's the case for now. What you would do is hold the last note, the allotted 3 beats, and then add an extra 1 beat. Then you've got your 2 rests. So here is that demonstrated. Let's look at a hymn that is in 4/4. Let's use Christ is made the sure foundation to the tune Unser Herrscher as an example. So this one starts right on the downbeat, no pickup. The last bar of the tune sounds like this. So you get 2 quarter notes, 1, 2, and then on beats 3 and 4, you have a half note, 3, 4. Now we need a little bit of space between here and the beginning of the next verse, so what do we do? Well, I would suggest, if we're using this more mathematical method, hold out the last note for 2 beats, then break for 2 beats, and then enter at the beginning. So you essentially get a 6/4 bar at the end rather than a 4/4 bar. Let me play the last phrase for you. So that's how I would do it. Now let's say, just for the sake of this demonstration, that this hymn tune had a pickup note. How would we handle that? Well, I would just turn the last half note into a dotted half note, which, when you take into account the 2 beats of silence, just adds another 4/4 measure to the whole thing. So the last bar would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me demonstrate, and I'm going to add a pickup as if there was one in this tune. Now, what do you do if a hymn does not start on the downbeat or doesn't have a pickup? Let's say it starts on beat 2. An example of this would be For All the Saints. There's a downbeat rest, and then all congregation enter on beat 2. So at the end of the verses, how are we going to indicate to the congregation not to sing too early? Well, in these cases, For All the Saints actually has a note written in the accompaniment on the downbeat, but some hymns do not, such as This Is My Song, the Finlandia tune. But I advocate for always adding some sort of a downbeat, particularly in the pedal, as sort of an indicator not to sing yet, but reassuring the congregation that their time is coming. At the ends of verses, how long are you going to hold the last note, and how much space are you going to give them? Well, I like to stick with the rule of 2 beats of rest. So One beat of rest will be that downbeat of the next verse, beat 1. And then you'll add an additional rest before that one on beat 4. That means the last chord of this tune we will hold for 3 beats. So this has been an overview of how to handle the ends of verses going into other verses, and how to handle phrasing within the verses when there are commas, when there are breaks, and when you want the congregation to hold over. I hope this has been helpful. You may want to use some of these methods. You may not like any of them. So if you have other ideas, go with those. Test them out with your congregation. See what works in your particular context.